everyone, this is Lomi, and it's been a bit since I had a chance to test some new Faceup supplies. I've shared before about how I was really happy with the Arteza watercolor pencils and gouache paints I got, so I was happy to get the chance to try out a few more things. The soft pastels are a relatively new addition to their lineup, so I figured they'd be good to try, as well as their professional watercolor paints. The scissors weren't part of the plan, but my dressmaker's shears developed a catch and need to be sent for sharpening, so I'm glad to have them, and we'll see how well they work for the kind of stuff I do. So the pastels are this big set of 72 pastels. It has 2 black and 2 white, so it's 70 different colors. Unlike most big sets of pastels though, these are full-size sticks and not half sticks. At time of filming, there are no colors available individually, but that's probably because this is a relatively new product. There weren't originally single colors available for the watercolor pencils, and now they do offer those in 3 packs of single colors, so I expect they'll probably do the same thing here in the future. If you like the look of these, want to give them a try, there's a link to each item in the video description, as well as a 10% off discount code for viewers of my channel. The pastels come in a really nice solid box that has a canvas texture on it, and one of the things I immediately loved was that it has little plastic tabs on the sides of the top tray, so it's easy to lift it free of the box without spilling anything. The tabs are really thick and glued on really well, so I don't see them coming off anytime soon, and that's a small attention to detail that makes it so easy to get these out. The pastels are cushioned in stiff foam inserts that protect them from breakage, and even though our delivery people are never gentle, these all arrived in perfect condition. The range of colors is pretty nicely balanced, and I'm really pleased with the peachy colors included in this set because they're more pink-toned than orange, which means they'll be beautiful for doll face-ups. I don't typically use pastels for things outside of doll customization, so I find the browns, peaches, reds, and purples are really the most important colors in a set. The others are good for unique makeup and eyeshadow, but those are what I use the most. Most inexpensive pastels are pretty hard, so how soft these were to the touch was kind of surprising, and that means good things, so I'm hoping these will perform well. They're definitely softer than a lot of the budget options I've used, and I kinda like that. Softness alone isn't an indicator of pigment or color laydown, but it can make them easier to work with, and I find that just skimming a pastel over my fingers, not even really pressing, just gently drawing it across my skin, leaves a decent amount of color behind. We'll see how they do in a test face-up in a minute. The other thing that came this time was the 12-pack of premium watercolors. Since it's a small set, it only has the most commonly used pigments, but this includes black, white, 2 yellows, 2 reds, 2 blues, 2 greens, and 2 browns, which means it's more than enough colors for painting dolls. I've used Arteza's gouache on many of the face-ups I've done in the past few years, and I'm hoping the watercolors will deliver a similar result. I can't believe how big these tubes are either. Watercolors tend to come in little tiny tubes that are really expensive, and these are gigantic. They're the same size as the gouache tubes I got before, so if these perform as well as the gouache, that will be a steal. Each color comes labeled with a bit of information about the pigment. The little plus marks indicate light fastness, and all of these are high, while the little box between the light fastness rating and the pigment code indicates opacity of the paint, or how solid and not see-through the color is. The empty box means lowest opacity, a full box means highest opacity, and the half box is in the middle. These will get used in my test face-up too, but I figured I'd have a look at those scissors first, since I actually needed them the same night these things arrived, and I had a couple observations I wanted to share on them as far as sewing scissors go. I used these scissors when making Laylee's corset, so you might have spotted them in that video last week, and I'll just go ahead and say that I'm glad I got these because they're actually a lot more comfy than my dressmaker shears because the handles are soft, which is nice for my unfortunately bendy hands. They're right-handed scissors, though the handles are straight so they're not super uncomfortable in the left hand. You just have the right-handed orientation for the blades. Not a problem for me since I'm a righty, but it's an important thing to know if you're not. The construction feels nice though, and they feel good and sharp. The blades are slightly more curved than the scissors made for fabric, and I don't mean that in the angle of the cutting blades themselves because the blades are slightly concave to create a really tight cutting edge, but you can see the actual blades themselves have a tiny bit of a curve, as well as a rounded nose, which makes you less likely to cut yourself. The scissors made for fabric are straighter and also have a really pointy tip. This curve doesn't affect the performance of the largest or smallest pair of scissors at all on fabrics, and you can see the big one cuts cotton fabric like butter. I tried them on slippery satin as well and found they worked quite well and were just as sharp as my very expensive dressmaker shears. The curve is a little more pronounced on the middle-sized scissors, and I did feel them slipping on the cotton because of the blade curve, but didn't encounter that issue when cutting heavier materials like fleece or vinyl. So fabric weight affects that a lot, and it's good to know which pair is going to be right for which material, and it's also nice to have different scissors for different jobs, so I think I'll keep the long ones and the short ones as scissors for delicate fabrics, and the medium pair for heavyweight fabrics, vinyl, and cutting out patterns because they did just fine there. And the length of the biggest and smallest pairs are better suited to material anyway. It's not really a problem or a design flaw because obviously these are meant for general crafting purposes, which can include fabric, but they're not specifically made for it. On paper and cardstock, there are no issues with slipping at all. The set as a whole meets my expectations and needs though, so I'm happy to add them to my studio. Not something I would normally review exactly, but since I had specific observations about which pair was best suited to which job, I figured it would be a good idea to throw that commentary out there. But I know you're probably here for the face-up stuff, so let's get on with it. I'll start with the watercolor paints, putting just a dab of each color out on my ceramic palette. I'll add a bit of water and swatch these to see how bold the colors are. They're definitely intense, so nothing skimped on there. They thin down nicely and also very smoothly, which kind of surprised me because I know several of these pigments are usually granulating colors, particularly the ultramarine and cerulean blue, and also the black, which is oxide black. The granulation was incredibly minimal though, which usually indicates pigments that have been milled to a much finer size to improve the texture of the paint. This is really good news for face-up artists because it means you'll be able to get intense color without any of the grainy or gritty effects that granulating colors usually cause. My swatching skills are not the best, but you can see that the grittiness in the colors is really minimal, so that's fantastic for this purpose. The next test I put the paints through was letting them dry out on the palette overnight to see how smoothly they reactivate. Some paints get really clumpy and require more mixing to reactivate, but I found these softened up again really nicely and didn't take much stirring to get all the paint to dissolve. I'm so used to using gouache that I kind of messed up my fine lines at first because my paint was way too thick, so it wasn't going on well at all. I ended up wiping the first attempt off and trying again with the paints thinned out a lot more, and the results were a lot better. So a bit of user error there, but it worked out with a couple minutes of practice. I used a little bit of every single color on Robin, my doll family practice head, so that I could check for staining risk. The doll had been sealed previously with 2 layers of Mr. Super Clear, and it has some blue and pink staining already from previous experiments, so I'm not too worried about damage here. I let the paint sit overnight so it had a good chance to stain, then I try wiping it off with water to see how badly it does. And honestly, I wasn't prepared for it to come off without leaving any ghosting behind. Browns, blacks, and reds typically stain the worst, but all those colors wiped right off without leaving any marks behind in the sealant. This is wonderful because it means mistakes would be super easy to clean up. What did leave a little ghosting behind was the blue pigments and the yellow, and the lighter red to a lesser extent, and those are probably all a result of the pigments being a finer milled pigment that penetrates more deeply into the sealant because the particles are finer. It's a really faint hint though, and I'm pretty sure that wiping it with something more than a cotton swab would take care of that ghost of color left behind. This probably wouldn't stain like this if it were cleaned off immediately too. Most people aren't going to leave a mistake to sit in a Faceup for 12 hours. Just to check, I grab a melamine sponge, also known as a magic eraser, and yep, the discoloration wipes out of the sealant with just a few passes. This doesn't damage the sealant layer, so I can continue straight on with the Faceup from here without having to reseal the doll. This is good, and when it comes to the staining and granulation, these watercolors actually performed better for Faceups than the much more expensive core watercolors I tested previously. So big thumbs up. If you have difficulty thinning other paints to the proper consistency for thin lines, watercolors might be an excellent choice for you. Now let's check out those pastels. I added some quick eyelashes and eyebrows on Robin as a basis for a Faceup. Now we'll put some blushing on it. There are two important factors to consider for Faceup pastels. One is the softness, which affects how well the pastels powder for application, and the other is color payoff, which is determined by how much pigment is in the pastels. If a pastel is soft enough, you can just scrape it back and forth on a piece of paper and it'll powder itself up, which is what these do very nicely. It makes a really smooth powder all on its own. It's also possible to scrape it against something like a hobby knife, or in this case, the edge of a pair of scissors to scrape powder off. These are soft enough that I barely need to brush it across the edge of the scissors to get a fine powder, so I don't think the scraping is even necessary here. That's a pleasant surprise. The texture and color density of these pastels seems to be really uniform across the colors, which is nice because sometimes you have colors that are grittier than others, which causes the granulation issues in paints too. These are nice and smooth, and I pick 4 colors to use in this example: a pink and peach for blushing, brown for brows, and a blue to use around the eyes, because Robin's got blue staining around the eyes, so let's roll with it. I pick up a bit of peach pastel on a fluffy brush, and while I expected these to be less pigmented and more chalky like the other pastels I use a lot, these actually have a pretty serious color payoff on the first layer. This was a big surprise for me because I don't typically see really intense color laydown on the first layer with anything but the really expensive pastels that cost a good $5 for one pastel. I'm using a much lighter hand than usual because you probably all know by now that I'm pretty heavy-handed with pastels, so I'm trying to really take it easy here and not overdo it. But maybe overdoing it would be a good thing because that'll give a better idea of color intensity. So let's pick up a lot of pastel on that brush like I usually do and see what happens. It actually blended in really smoothly, and I'm kind of stunned because when I use more pigment-rich pastels, I usually have problems with them getting grainy or blotchy looking with a heavy application. Since this is a first layer, there'll be some unevenness just because that always happens, but I'm really surprised by how not streaky these pastels are and how smoothly they blend out. When I picked these, I sort of expected them to be more similar to my budget-friendly low Cornell pastels that go on smooth but have a low color payoff, especially since this set is similarly priced. But these are a lot better, and I think this set is going to become its replacement. Mistakes and edges are easy to wipe off with a magic eraser, so refining brow shapes and the like is still something easy to achieve. I'm happy. I like testing new stuff, but I don't usually expect it to be better than the stuff I currently use, you know? I decided to use a different brush for the blue, and I'm not sure this was the best choice of brushes, as it didn't go on quite as smoothly as the other brush laid things down. But I experiment with a flat chisel blender too, and I found that the amount of pastel I could get into one layer of sealant was really quite impressive. I think this will work really nicely for color layering and blending, and the color laydown is rich enough that I feel like you could change a doll's whole color with this. Poor Robin, look what I've done to you this time. And of course, if you change your mind, mistakes are super easy to wipe off with water, so we're back down to the base doll on that side. After trying these out, I'm actually really excited to see what else I can do with them, so it's safe to say I find they're really nice. So yeah, I'm super happy with everything that came in this haul. It performed a lot better than I expected, and I'm looking forward to using them again. But weirdly enough, I think my favorite part is the little paper wrapper the pastels come in, so I can pick up and prepare pastels without getting it all over my fingers. That's the little things, right? And that's all for today though. Thanks for watching. Bye.